Hello chess friends and welcome to Zaro's chess channel and welcome to our basics in chess series. So in this series we're following opening principles, middle game strategies and the endgame strategies. Today we'll talk about some endgames again, and today's subject will be the so-called Bahr's rule in chess endgames, pawn, king and chess endgames. So you don't want to, of course, lose, draw endgames, but you don't want to draw, of course, winning endgames. So this Bahr rule is very important, and we have now seen also in this top grandmaster level that top grandmasters make mistakes in these types of endgames when you don't have so many pieces on the board, when you have only maybe rook pawns, maybe knight pawns on the board, because endgames are really complex. And I think you should be really familiar with this Bahr's rule, because when we play, for instance, a middle game, maybe you're down some material, maybe you're down a pawn, then you should be really familiar with the setup to make a draw, even if you have even if you're one pawn down. So the Bahr rule says this: first, you should realize this setup. We have the pawn on h4, we have distant pawns on h4 and h5. So in order to make a draw here, you should place your pawn on h5. So if you place the pawn on h6 and it's white's move, white will play the move h5, then suddenly it's a winning endgame here for white. So the first thing about the Bahr's rule to make a draw is that you place the pawn on h5. So it means on the fifth, or from white's perspective, of course, on the first rank. The other thing is that we draw the diagonal. So the Bahr's rule says if we place a diagonal, we place the diagonal to the file where the bishops are. For instance, there is the bishop in the beginning of the chess game on the f file and on the c file. So we should place a diagonal. We are the defender now. From black's perspective, we'll call black the defender now, white the attacker, because white is of course one pawn up. So the defender, we should draw really a diagonal here to the f file. So it's the square f7 here, and when we draw a diagonal to this particular part of the board, then we see that, let's draw only this diagonal now, that the pawn of white is above this diagonal. And when that happens, so this is the second term, when in order to make a draw, when you see the pawn is above this particular diagonal, so it means now the pawn is already on c5, this is again a draw. The third thing that you should make in order to go into the Bahr's rule is to have a confrontation with your king. So it means we should really play in opposition on the king or on the pawn. We should really place our king on the pawn and or on the king. So this should be a draw, because we have now the three stages of the Bahr's rule. We have the pawn on the fifth rank. As I said, we could place it also on the fourth rank. The other thing is we have the pawn, white's pawn is above this diagonal. This is very important, and we have this direct confrontation with the pawn and the king. So let's see the possible outcome. So white plays king to d4. What white wants to do is, of course, leave the protection of this particular pawn, go to this pawn and simply take it and promote this pawn. So this is the main goal. But here black goes simply king to c7, king to e5. We go simply after this pawn, and now the most important thing is that we corner our king. So we go now into this Trojan endgame, because white cannot promote this pawn, because if king to h7 happens, we can simply play with our king. King h5, we simply play only on these two squares. If king to h6, we simply play king to g8, king to g6, and now king to h8. So it's again a forced draw. So let's see now another example. Here we can see it's a similar position, but there is not the third term of the Bahr's rule. So we have the pawn on the fifth rank. We have this direct confrontation. We have the opposition on white king. But let's draw this diagonal. We have now the diagonal again on the f file. But you see, this pawn is not above. So if the pawn would be on c5, like in our previous example, this would be a draw. Now the pawn on c4 is below this diagonal or on the same diagonal. So now if the pawn is below or on the same diagonal, it's a winning endgame here for white. It's incredible, this Bahr rule. Here let's see the possible continuation. Again, king to e4. You see now the king is a little bit far away from the action. After king takes c4, we can simply go after the pawn. After taking the pawn, now king to g6. So you see, black has lost sort of a tempo, because black went below the line below this diagonal that we do that we showed, and here it's now completely winning endgame after king to e7, king to g7, and we simply push the pawn to promote the queen, and it's game over. So let's see now a third example. Here it's white to move. So we see that black has the confrontation. If we maybe draw a diagonal, we could probably place a pawn, but the problem is it's a white move, and white can play always the move g5 first, king to g7, and now very important a5. So we don't have anymore this second term. We didn't place the pawn on the fifth rank or on the fourth rank from white's perspective. So let's see now again the possible continuation. Maybe king to g6, we'll simply go here. After king to g7, we go here. Maybe white goes here to f7, but now we go simply after the pawn. So here again, you see black loses another tempo and cannot get the king, because after king takes a6, we have king to d6, and now again white will go simply to b7 and will promote to queen. So, and let's see now this possible endgame. Let's go back. Here you see white is down material. So in order to make the Bahr's rule, we should first, as I said, make our first idea to place the pawn on the fourth or fifth rank, because we have already the confrontation. And let's see the possible continuation. So h4, b3, and you see now again, if we draw a diagonal here again to the f file, now from white's perspective, of course, and we place now the diagonal here, you see the pawn is below the action, sort of, and now this should be a draw. As I said, if this pawn would be on this file, or maybe here on c5, then when we draw this diagonal, the pawn would be on the same diagonal, so it wouldn't be below, it would be on the same or above. Then it's a winning game here for black, but in this particular case it's a draw, because we have placed first of all our pawn on h4. So here let's see the possible continuation. King to b2, now h5, we again maneuver our king, and now we simply go after this pawn, but black cannot promote to queen because we corner our king again. We play simply king to f1, and black doesn't have this extra tempo because, as I said, the pawn was too far away from to expose, sort of, and now we can again corner our king, and it's so. Please remember this. As I said, we should watch after the move h5. We draw this diagonal we go here to f2. Now when we draw this diagonal, we see when we take this square, the pawn is below this diagonal, so this should be a draw. So this is the Bahr's rule. I think it's very important because sometimes we played maybe a bad middle game. We are down material, we are maybe down a pawn, but you should really keep that in mind when we have these distant pawns. First, play our pawn on h4 or on the fourth rank or on the fifth rank. Try to expose black a little bit, or the attacker, sort of. In this particular case, black is the attacker because black is up some material, so we should force him to play the pawn as far as possible to our side of the board, and then we should corner our king and make a draw. So I hope you realize these ideas. This is really important. It's as I said, I've seen top grandmaster games. Top grandmasters lost some games in this particular rule, so it's not a complex idea, but you see, sometimes we can miss some ideas if we don't play correctly and lose drawish games or draw winning games. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this video. Meanwhile, you can watch my other basics chess series videos with some more opening principles, middle game strategies, endgame strategies, and you can also watch my chess endgames series, in which I show you this kind of possible endgames that can happen to you in a chess game. And if you like this content, you can also subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.